the disability community is not some kind of separate lane. It's not a specialized topic. It is the human experience in this country. And whether we're talking about physical, mental, emotional, intellectual, developmental disabilities, blindness or deafness, people who have low vision or hard of hearing, we're talking about us. And what we have or have not done to really see ourselves and our whole selves in the economy. And we live in a moment of technological growth. Our prosperity is moored to technological innovation, but so are our biggest existential crises moored to that same technological innovation. And we need to figure out right now whether people who've been left out are going to be left in on the next phase of innovation. And that's sort of what brought me to the table.
Every week here on More Than Profit, we explore the stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and investors who have made a difference in the world while building successful businesses. We sit down with each guest and dive into their personal journey, their struggles and triumphs, and the lessons they've learned along the way.
On this episode, we sit down with Regina Kline, an investor, entrepreneur, civil rights lawyer, and thought leader dedicated to building the future of work by advancing the rights and interests of people with disabilities as innovators, workers, business owners, and consumers. As founder and managing partner of Enable Ventures and founder of SmartJob, Gina is singularly focused as a leader on closing the disability wealth gap through investing. Gina is wicked smart and easily commands the statistics that inform her work and investment thesis. But more than this, she truly sees people. She's a champion for the dignity and worth of all people. Her enthusiasm and passion are unwavering, and you will never leave a conversation with her without feeling inspired to effect positive change in the world around you.
Over the last 5 weeks, Brian, you've experienced it a couple of times, but I broke my foot. I was trail running and I tripped on a root, came down hard, and I snapped that outside metatarsal, and they put me in a boot. And literally 3 days after my break, I had to jump on a plane, and I had this lovely little scooter that kind of carted me around places, and I've been on crutches probably the last 2 or 3 weeks, but never in my life have I had a greater appreciation for being a two-legged person that actually appreciated, didn't have to think about the variations of sidewalks and terrain and, I mean, you name it, the pain that I felt in my knee on that scooter or on my armpits on the crutches. I have never thought more about what people with disabilities have to go through, and the fact that like someone in a wheelchair or that might be blind walking around and trying to navigate the world, it's pretty crazy.
So for those listeners, because again, Gina, we have thousands of listeners, probably millions actually, but the biggest thing I have to say is going, first of all, Bryce's foot, he sent me the x-ray of it. I didn't see anything. And again, I'm not an expert, but I don't know. But I'm going to believe it because it was really black and blue. And he was, I think, in a lot of pain. But what was amazing for me is going, even this morning, I was at a coffee shop. I am hyper aware now. We did an event, Bryce and I, when he said, like, Bryce is my right-hand man. I mean, I'm like, his father figure, all that stuff, sure. But like, I'm Bryce's right-hand man. And it was that crazy moment where I had to start looking at, he couldn't wheel around some of the spaces we were in. And then it was crazy where now I go places. Even we were just in Austin, Texas together, and probably 3 or 4 times I'm like, gosh, I'm glad you did not bring your little wheelie thing because you couldn't get through this. And so now it's a thing going until you experience it through friendship or family or something like that. Like now I am one of those advocates, even with our own building. I met with one of our owners and just said, the 3rd floor isn't set up for handicap access. So I don't know how Bryce would have gotten around on this, which, anyways, that's a whole another thing. But where I just go, I'm hyper aware now. And so our guest today is been hyper aware of it probably sounds like most of her life. But yeah, Bryce, would you do the introduction today?
So I met Gina, I don't know, less than a year ago. Specifically, we met at the Sorensen Impact Summit in Utah. And it was such a special time because I was sitting in an audience and she was moderating a panel with these amazing entrepreneurs that were solving, I think, some of our world's biggest challenges, some of our unseen challenges, if you will, because there are thousands of people in America that experience challenges just because of their physical or mental limitations, and they need adjustments just like we do, and they need to be seen and heard and known, and to be people of dignity and worth and value. And that's what Regina was doing on that stage. She was giving voice to some of these challenges, and I think in a powerful way, investing in new technologies that help support people with disabilities across the world. So, Gina, I just want to say thank you first and foremost for the work that you do. And then I want to kind of, like Brian said, how did you find yourself kind of in this work? Because your background is quite impressive. We could go down the list and of all of your accolades, but this work specifically, how did you find yourself kind of focusing in on this?
Thank you. I want to say thank you, Bryce and Brian, for having me on and to have a chat. And thank you for that very kind introduction. So, I started as a civil rights lawyer before becoming the founder and managing partner of Enable Ventures, which is a Sorensen-backed impact venture capital firm. And, we are the first impact venture capital firm that is working to close the disability wealth gap. So it's important to talk about that, but how did you get there? Why are you doing that? Well, I became very aware in my career as a civil rights lawyer that 1 in 5 Americans has a disability, but there are some unbelievable statistics that are little known but very much felt in this country that have to do with the poverty dashboard. And nearly 2/3 of working age adults with disability are in fact not employed. Half of everyone living in long-term poverty in the United States strongly identifies with disability. We're talking about a nearly $2 trillion hole in global GDP. So when you think about, and that hole, Bryce, is where disability talent, labor, and ideas should live. When you think about what it's like to be a civil rights lawyer, where you're evaluating the contours of an unemployment crisis, and where it's only been a civil right not to be discriminated against in employment if you have a disability in the United States, it's only been a civil right for roughly 3 decades. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. So that's the problem statement. Now, Here is the good news, which is that I started to realize, as many have, that the disability community is not some kind of separate lane. It's not a specialized topic. It is the human experience in this country. And whether we're talking about physical, mental, emotional, intellectual, developmental disabilities, blindness or deafness, people who have low vision or hard of hearing, we're talking about us. And
Right.
what we have or have not done to really see ourselves and our whole selves in the economy. And we live in a moment of technological growth. Our prosperity is moored to technological innovation, but so are our biggest existential crises moored to that same technological innovation. And we need to figure out right now whether people who've been left out are going to be left in on the next phase of innovation. And that's sort of what brought me to the table.
And are you hopeful for that, like that people will be left in? I mean, just from your vantage point, because obviously you're living in it.
I am so hopeful. And not only am I hopeful, I'll tell you why. Because it's the presentation of the facts about the future that are persuasive. And that is that we live in a time of tectonic shift, certainly with technology. But demography is destiny. We live in a time where the disability population has swelled to 1.5 billion people on planet Earth and growing. We live in a time where we have just had a worldwide experiment with the vulnerability that attaches to disability. That's COVID. We've had people who have, for the first time, identified themselves to their employers as having a disability because they no longer want to let go of the flexibilities afforded them during the pandemic. They're returning to work. They're demanding accommodations at work. We have other people who've never experienced disability before in their life who who have come into the COVID experience, the long COVID experience, who are demanding flexibility where they work in the community and so on. So we are living in an economy that's now putting a premium and is indexing flexibility. And it's the disability community that has always led on those designs. And it's the discipline to approach life with problem-solving capability, productive conversations about how to do things differently, and how to design not for the few, but for the whole. And on that last point, it was the disability community, and particularly during South African civil and human rights movement to include people with disabilities, there was a credo that was born that was nothing about us without us. Should not design government and rights without people with disabilities at the heart of those designs. It's sort of like in the United States, no taxation without representation.
Yeah.
That I have equities here, and the design needs to be reflective of my equities. There's nothing more abundantly clear than that in the technology market, that technology has everything to gain with no downside risk when it is planned for people who might not be in the core of the user testing and design experience, but might be on the margins, might have been left out, overlooked, underrepresented in technology design and in customer experience and user design. And what we're seeing is hundreds of ADA generation kids who have come of prime working age years, who are demanding radically inclusive technologies in school, at work, in higher education. And that's the market that we're investing into.
That's great.
So Gina, I think first off, very powerful. I mean, those statistics are mind-boggling. I think pointing to the fact that we all experience this on some level, whether it's ourselves personally right now or in the future as we age, but also just family members that are going through things that need accommodation. But I think one of the things that was powerful when we first met at the Sorensen Summit were some of these examples, some of these amazing entrepreneurs that are solving some challenges. I found often that I don't even realize is a problem, right? I mean, so what would be an example, like as people, because I do think people really resonate with an example. Like what's one of your, I know you don't want to choose favorites, but what's one of your favorite companies right now that you're working with solving a really big challenge for people with disabilities?
Well, there are tremendous companies in the market, and to highlight one would not imply that it's the
exactly.
It's the only one.
The
because every day we bump into innovators from around the world and prolific throughout the United States that are working on these problem statements. An example would be, and a trend in the market that we're seeing, is this idea of what's the antidote to the discriminatory bias that's baked into a lot of the AI algorithms and technologies that people are using to find, obtain, and sustain employment. And when you think of, there's a lot of doomsdayers who are concerned about the lightning speed with which AI is developing and widening, and ostensibly there is the potential to widen inequality if people who are not considered, are not recognized, are not honored by algorithms. And in the job matching, job searching, job identification market, HR tech, there's a lot of concern that the inclusion of disability in those conversations, the self-identification by a job applicant of a disability, will get them screened right out of the job market by incumbents. But how can you exist in a competitive sense in a global marketplace looking for a job, not using the cutting edge tools to find that job and be identified by employers who are recruiting? And we're seeing companies like Inclusively in the disability market who are solving for that problem, who are trying to approach AI as an opportunity to drive impact by radically including disability and the self-identified population of candidates with disabilities who are looking for jobs, and to screen them in, not screen them out, and match candidates with employers who are in search of disability diverse talent. And we're seeing examples like that grow in the economy, do quite well. Today, there are 100,000 active users on the Inclusively platform who are self-identified people with disabilities looking for a job.
Wow.
And that pales in comparison to many other platforms where people are afraid to self-identify because they'll be screened out.
Wow.
Which makes sense. I mean, yeah, gosh. So I think for me, Gina, this is why it's mind-blowing going, you realize how just the level, because I have to say, on a basic human level, the level of anxiety that I had for Bryce when he was trying to get around places, and I know his personality, even getting him on stage at one point, there were so many chords, and I just remember going, Bryce can't come up here. And then I had this moment of panic because Bryce and I always address the crowd. And I just think, I don't know, there's just so much that you have to be thinking of. Because even like when you just said AI, I'm like, everything I read, nothing even talked about AI the last week, where I just go, oh my gosh, like I wasn't even thinking new technologies that are coming out and being aware of how do we take all people into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunity set, though, Brian, is more than being taken into consideration. What this crop of founders and innovators are doing is leading.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They are going to determine how to put human-centered design at the core of the evolution of some of these technologies, whether it be computer vision, sensors, AI, machine learning, and so on. And that's a real game change.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and what I love, Gina, about you championing this, one of my favorite books that I've read over the years is Change by Design. And an example that they use in there is the invention of the MRI machine. So if you've ever gotten an MRI, it's this massive machine. It's claustrophobic. It looks like a spaceship. It's kind of freaky. You can almost find yourself getting anxious just even thinking about going inside of this thing. And the designer never once factored in the human experience when they built it. And then they had already designed this thing and it was in production. And then they asked them, holy crap, like people are going to freak out. Specifically, children are going to freak out. And so but it was already in production. They couldn't go back and change anything. So now there was this whole aftermarket movement to try to like actually make the experience more inviting and less freaky. And so I think about that as the way you're talking about it, which is like, I think if you ask the average person on the street, should we make concessions for people with disabilities? Should we care for them? Do you care for them? I think the answer is going to be yes. I just don't think a lot of people that are building technology for today and for tomorrow even factor that in until it's too late.
And the thing is that the folks that are going to factor it in the most are founders with disabilities who are leveraging their lived experiences. They're trading on how proximate the problem statement is in their lives. They're going to leverage their lived experience to develop a product design that truly has efficacy. When we see founders without disabilities, we see so many innovators who have developed partnership and alliance with the community where they're co-creating and co-designing with end users, with the community from the start. But the key is that the experiences aren't lost in the product design in the beginning, that they're baked in, and that these products are tested with the attitude of stress testing product to be radically inclusive, to leave fewer consumers behind. There was some great data that came out that was talking about the disability market. And by the way, it's been adjudged to be the size of China. We've got 1.5 billion people with an $8 to $9 trillion annual disposable income. What they actually looked at when they're looking at the disability economy is the knock-on effects to friends and family. 1 in 5 Americans, if we just pause for a minute and think about that, it's somebody in everybody's family.
Correct.
It's somebody in everybody's friend network. So the effects from a consumer perspective of radical inclusive design is that it will have abundant benefits to other consumers, greater market penetration. And, that annual disposable income goes up to around from 8 to 9 of people with disabilities up to $13 trillion, because we're finding that folks are more readily adopt products that are designed for multiple use cases. The examples are replete in history. I don't have enough free time, but someday we got to write a book about this.
Yes.
We've got SMS texting, which was invented by a deaf man trying to order a pizza, but all the way back to the typewriter which was an invention of a blind man writing a love letter.
Mm.
We have cruise control, sliding doors, the backbone of the internet. These all have disability innovation at their heart, either founders who were leveraging the experience of disability or the community rising up to test products, which led to these inventions.
Yeah.
And so that idea that society is being served, society writ large is being served by that which is led by disability, is where the market is going.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's your comment around that lived experience, because the designing in from that lived experience of a person with disability benefits the whole. Whereas you inverse it, somebody that doesn't factor that, cares about it, but maybe not even factor that from the beginning, excludes a large segment of our population. So I think that lived experience, to your point, like SMS and typewriters, like the number of technological improvements that came about because someone experienced something that excluded them from full participation in the economy or in their community has had unbelievable benefits for everyone. And that's the real beauty of it. So that's awesome.
That's right. And it's playing out whether we know of it or not. All of the component parts in your iPhone, many of them were informed by the experience of disability. Audiobooks.
Yeah.
There was a great company called Fingerworks, which invented the touchscreen acquired by Apple. But the founder of Fingerworks had carpal tunnel syndrome and was trying to get away from the QWERTY keyboard.
Wow.
And so we know this to be true. Now, what was missing for a generation was economic remuneration for those ideas. Remuneration of that person that was informing the product design based on their lived experience. And that's changing now, where we're living in a new day where investors are investing in the experience and in the product design and in founders who are carrying that experience and leading high growth startups.
That's awesome.
If you're part of a homeowners association who's interested in saving money on home services, let me tell you about PIN Plus, the ultimate platform that brings neighbors together under one powerful concept: power in numbers. With PIN Plus, homeowners associations can now access group discounted pricing on essential home services: trash, pest control, pool maintenance, and so much more, all at unbeatable rates. The best part, PIN Plus is designed for you, the community members. Manage your accounts, pay bills, sign up for services, and discover exciting community-wide events, all with a simple tap of a button. Your entire community, united as one customer, allows them to negotiate fantastic deals with trusted vendors in your area. So why wait? Unleash the power in numbers today and transform your home service experience. Download the PIN Plus app from the App Store or Google Play Store, or visit www.mypinplus.com for more information. Now back to the episode.
Okay, Gina, so switching gears a little bit. Some people would say that there are too many lawyers in the world to begin with, right? And so, jury's out. But you chose to be an attorney, but you also kind of found yourself as a civil rights attorney. So I'd like to know, a little bit about, the younger Gina. Like what kind of led you down that path? How did you pursue that as a pathway? Because it's not for the faint of heart. I mean, I know in your past you've been a trial attorney and different things like that, but what has gravitated you towards those things as you think about your life? Because what you're chasing right now is impressive. What you're able to rattle off as it relates to statistics and the number of founders and is amazing. And so I'm really curious what informed that as you were growing up.
Yeah, as I was growing up, Bryce, well, I came from a family that was a family of ideas, and the dinner table was the Lincoln Douglas debate. And,
that's awesome.
But in that family, there was always a very strong conviction around advancing the rights of others. And I think that goes back to sort of my ancestry. On my father's side, there was sort of a family story of my paternal grandfather, who was a psychiatrist and trying to advance and uplift our understanding of mental health, but who died very abruptly at a very young age and left a widow with 9 children, one of which was my father, and sort of a
And when you say that though, he died in his 50s. Was that
yes,
right? How old was he when he? Yeah,
yes,
so he was young.
super young
Yeah.
by any account, and it was sort of a riches to rags story, which was shocking and abrupt, where his psychiatric nurse wife, my paternal grandmother, was left with 9 kids in the
Wow.
mid-50s. And my father and several of my uncles were able to make it to college essentially by going to a boarding school, a high school preparatory school that was endowed by Milton Hershey
Oh, wow.
for boys that had been orphaned and lost one or both parents and lived, within certain economic constraints. And so that story lived large in my childhood, that there was a profound intervention of philanthropy in our family's life, in my father's life. My father went on to be a championship wrestler in the 60s
Oh,
at
wow.
Penn State. On my mother's side, there's a bit of a different story, one of immigration through Ellis Island from my Italian grandparents who had left Italy because of the rise of Mussolini. But that was a story about building and entrepreneurship, that I had a paternal grandfather who built the town church, who built the town's bank, who built the elementary school as a builder. And yet he had come to the United States with only a few dollars in his pocket. So I understood that this was a place of opportunity, but also a place where our opportunity was very much afforded by privilege, and the privilege that was bestowed by very important economic interventions.
Mm.
And that I also understood that not every family was like mine, that upward mobility was a privilege, and that there were other people that had very real systemic constraints on whether they could have a similar family story. And I wanted to get about learning about that injustice and understanding it. And what I realized, very young, at a very young age, is that there were things that we could do together as a society to rectify some of the failures that have led to a lack of mobility for so many people in this country.
That's powerful.
So yeah, and I listened to. If you Google Regina Kline, and you will have there's tons of YouTube. So I had your story mixed. I thought that it was all one people that came over from Italy, fleeing Mussolini, and then they were the ones who then they built up the business. Well, anyways, and then lost it. And anyways, I was like, oh my gosh, for one family, but it was two separate families.
Two separate families,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
almost different sides of a coin.
Yeah.
In their experiences, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that can shape you for sure. So as you think about, the future, like right now, as you think about, the economic turmoil that we see kind of in our economy right now, from inflation, recession, the conflict that we see around the world, the effects of climate change and the number of displaced persons that's resulted in, and how are you seeing that as impacting the population that you're trying to serve through the work that you're doing at Enable? Do you see that impacting it negatively, positively? Has it made it more difficult as you think about, fundraising for the fund that you're doing, as well as fundraising for the entrepreneurs that are doing the good work within your portfolio even? Because I know across the board, the venture market is just really, really tough.
Yeah.
So how are you seeing those impacts as you think about the work from a macro economy, macro political, geopolitical perspective, but then also more specifically even within the venture market? What is that doing as you think about the work that you're doing and even the passion that you have for the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So I think that we've made a mistake in in impact financial circles when we talk about people and planet separately. And I think that we have such an inherent interconnectedness of our fate here with the existential crises that face us. Think about this. When there is a profound climate shock and a need for emergency evacuation, who do you think the last ones out are? There are people who are wheelchair users. There are people who are elderly. There are people who have not received the level of planning technology and foresight that they need from governmental entities and from the private sector and need more support. We've actually seen innovators in our market who are working on emergency evacuation.
Wow.
So when you think about the separation in conversations between people and planet, we do ourselves a disservice, because as we move forward in the coming decades, we're going to realize the humanitarian crisis that is inherently linked to the climate crisis, and that those that have been overlooked, underrepresented, and left out are the first that are truly and maybe literally in the eye of the storm. When we look at the storm that is, war, and now, I shudder to think that I'm speaking with you. I haven't had time to even truly reflect on what it means to be in multiple wars in the world simultaneous. But, I've just come from California to the SOCAP conference. There were founders from across the world that came to see us that are working on amputees and people who are in need of bionic arms and legs from the war in Ukraine, people who are interested in computer vision and advanced technology for wayfinding because they experience blindness in some of these regions with geopolitical strife. So the relevance is there, and the acknowledgement that we are a human population that is growing our disability population as we grow global conflicts and catastrophes is really necessary for us to reckon with. And it's also a very interesting revelation that our entire rehabilitation system comes from wars. The idea, and this, Bryce, as a former military veteran, that our technology around assisting people with physical and other disabilities was often built up in the aftermath of a war. The interesting opportunity for disruption now is that we're about the business of replacing tools that have been in effect for 100 years, that have not experienced any of the gains of the technology age and now are. And there is this appetite, this profound appetite from multi-billion person population to hang on to and attach to technology that can do things better, more agilely and differently in the field of rehabilitation, in the field of assistive technology, in the field of removing barriers, whether it be mobility, cognition, memory, and so on. So we're in a golden age, a golden era of advancement around some of those issues. Now, you asked me about what it's like to be a venture investor, not during a time of zero inflation and growth at all costs. But here's the interesting thing about the time we're in, is that I think the disability economy is going to be counter-cyclical. These founders have never lived high on the hog with growth at all cost. These are the most capital efficient folks you'll ever meet, who are new to the market, who are driving lean, mean companies to grow and scale because they have tremendous conviction that there is appetite for the products that they are developing. They're developing them with very strong product market fit with communities. They're informed by the end users that are that they cannot wait for the product to get to market. So I think we are in a highly differentiated space that's very exciting.
Yeah. So Gina, as the first kind of venture fund, and maybe still even the only, that really is focused on closing this disability wealth gap, how do we wake more people up to the opportunity, to the challenges of this community, to the fact that 1 in 5, that statistic's just kind of stuck in my brain. 1 in 5 people. I mean, you're right. That's somebody in my family. That's somebody in my friend group. How do we do that? How do we get more people awakened and then away from just kind of, the problems that they are targeting are first world problems that, that's where the money goes. How do we do that? Have you thoughts? I'm sure you have. What are some of your ideas on how do we get more investors? How do we get more people participating in this critical space?
Well, I think it's very important to recognize the value that the disability technology sector is conveying and to whom. And the most efficient way to spread gospel about this sector is to measure and to evaluate what the changeover baseline is and for whom. And many of the startups in our high growth disability technology sector are conveying value to some of the largest enterprise employers in the world. And whether it be captioning, like take a company like Ava that has AI generated real time captions. It used to be in my lifetime, you'd go to work and your deaf colleague would, and your employer would accommodate your deaf colleague by paying for a CART transcriber to come to the office to transcribe a meeting. Right now, what Ava is doing is procuring a very affordable product to the employer with very high accuracy. And the accuracy that is being produced on those captions is such that it is a great note taker. And other employees in that business are benefiting from the summary of the notes from the meeting. So when you think about how do we get people excited about the disability community and its contributions to technology, these are not point solutions just for that deaf worker, but these are point solutions that have high efficacy for that deaf employee and drive benefits across the workforce and become altogether 21st century productivity tools. And the excitement there is that we are able to identify why our workforce across this country is sometimes underemployed. Where there is a deficit on productivity, there's usually unidentified need for support. And with humility, I say, I think that most employers in the country have not yet understood who their workers are. And with more and more tools like this, the person with learning disabilities comes forward and says, I could use the captioning for note taking. The person with short-term memory loss says the same thing. And so what we're seeing is a revolution in this new market that productivity tools and understanding how to bring your best self to work, to school, to higher ed, to skills training, it's all on the table. And folks can get re-energized into a newfound understanding of who we are collectively.
Because you have to say any employer would want that to have the best version of their employee show up. And, again, I think raising awareness of going, wow, having help like that could help numerous employees. So yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So I would love, just tell the story about helping get a driver's license for a truck driver. Because
Brian brought this up before I hit record.
Gosh.
I wish we didn't do such great research. He knows everything.
Well, no. It was one of those stories where I was like, I was just rooting, going, oh my gosh, that's incredible. That,
yes.
So just tell that.
Well, when I was a very young recent graduate from college, I was part of a student group that was, and let me set the scene of when this was. It was during a time of the second Clinton administration and welfare reform. So there was a national and public conversation about how people can transition from public benefits to full employment, which was a conversation that was not unique to that period, but was prolific during that period. And as young students, we realized that we had a lot of resources and privilege that we wanted to pay forward in trying to assist people to obtain a workforce development and employment. And we were trying to do it in the towns where our universities were, as a matter of fact. So there were students that we were working across the nation together in coalition as young people to help people develop resumes, help people pick up soft skills training for interviewing, help people understand and identify where there was opportunity. And I remember the moment we realized there's this thing called Google, where we could not only find more job listings for people in some of these low and moderate income neighborhoods that needed assistance, but that it was altogether 10 times more efficient than what folks were doing before with the employment agency that they were relying upon. And there was a gentleman, now I look back with also total humility and realize how funny it was that I, as a very young person, was appointed to help find people who had been kind of driven in and out of the economy their whole lives and worked in any number of jobs. I was trying to help them find employment, and I myself had not been employed. So recent college graduate. And I remember a gentleman that came in, and I was running a job center through this program when I graduated college. And he came in and he said, I want to be a truck driver. And I said, great. And having none of the cynicism that builds inside of you over the course of your adult life, I said, let's do it. Tell me, have you ever driven a car? And the answer was no. He lived in one of the most historically isolated and segregated communities in all of Washington, D.C. And I said, has anyone ever looked into what the requirements are to be a truck driver for you? And he said, no. So I hit the Google, the space age weapon of choice at that point. And we worked together to get him enrolled in a CDL course in Nashville, Tennessee, where he graduated first in his class, perfect score, sent a picture of parallel parking a big rig truck, and continued to be a truck driver for years and years after that point. And that's a silly story in a way, because it's one person, and my career rolled up into more systems reform. But it was that one example that I reflect on all the time in my daydreaming, because it was that idea of, I try to remind myself not to become cynical,
Right.
to still believe in the potential of each person, the profound potential of people, and to test that in myself as we do this work, because people are capable. They're born capable.
They are.
Of a full imagination and a full range of outcomes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, again, so wrapping this up, but just going, I just want to thank you for being you, because I just go, your energy is infectious, where I just watch you and go, you really are doing the things that you talk about that you're doing. And then I also just keep coming back for, thank you for caring for 1 in 5 Americans, like where I do look at it going, it's all real. Like, people are, as we get age and different things like that, having advocates like you, very grateful for. It's
so easy, I think, to get discouraged. And, even some of the questions that I've asked, like, you've only brought positive responses. You see everything as an opportunity and something that can be done. So I just applaud you for that. And I want to say, even the story of that one person, like you genuinely see people and you want to help them. And so I appreciate that. And I wish you all the best of luck.
Thanks for listening to this episode of More Than Profit. To learn more about Regina and the amazing work of Enable Ventures, please visit www.enableventures.vc. To stay up to date with More Than Profit, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, drop us a review so others can find us as well. Don't forget to check out our new website at morethanprofit.fm, where we have additional content and past episodes. You can also learn more about what's ahead by following us on Twitter at listen_MTP. More Than Profit is a production of Access Ventures and is hosted by Bryce Butler and Brian McKay. Our executive producer is Crystal Escobar, and our associate producer is Bryn McKay. Audio production assistance is provided by Resonate Recording. Our theme song today was No Man's Land by Slapstorm. I'm Bryn McKay, and you've been listening to More Than Profit.